Hi everyone, my name is Mark Quinn. I'm a tax advisor and chartered financial planner, advising and helping predominantly British nationals relocate to Portugal or who are living in Portugal, and I help with their tax and financial affairs. And in this video I'm going to look at the difference between Golden Visa and the D7 visa from a tax planning perspective. So I've had two meetings this week whereby there's been a bit of confusion around the differences between the Golden Visa and D7 visa and what it means from a tax point of view. So I'm just going to start off by covering the basics, and forgive me if I've covered this in a previous video, but just thought it's worth recapping the difference. So whichever visa route you go down, it's simply a means of getting a residency, your legal residency here in Portugal. So when I first came to Portugal, it's 2014, I was an EU citizen because this was pre-Brexit. It was very easy. Go down to the local town hall, show your passport and you get a residency certificate. Very simple. Now for non-EU nationals, we have to go through some sort of visa process. And the most common one for my clients certainly have been either the D7 visa or the Golden Visa. So let's look at each in turn. The D7 visa is what's called a passive income visa. So in order to qualify under that scheme, you need to show that you're in receipt of either rent, interest, dividends or pension income. And it needs to be at a relatively low level. So I believe it's about €1,000 a month. Now, the positives of that visa is it's very low cost in the sense that there's no capital outlay needed to get into the scheme. You simply need to demonstrate that passive income. But the only major downside, or some people consider it a downside, is the minimum stay requirement, which is either 6 consecutive months or 8 months non-consecutive spread throughout the year. Now that's not an issue for most of you that are going to be relocating here full time, because a 6 or 8 month requirement is consistent with your new lifestyle. But some clients don't necessarily want to be tied, certainly at this stage in their lives, to having that minimum time spent in Portugal, and therefore the Golden Visa comes into its own. Now the Golden Visa is simply another way to get legal residency here in the same way that the D7 visa is, but the core distinction is there's no minimum time spent. So, I mean, there is in practice, I think it's 7 days in the first year or 14 days over 2 consecutive years, but it's a very, very low number of days you actually have to be here to qualify, unlike the 6 or 8 month requirement on the D7 visa. The major downside of the Golden Visa is the initial capital outlay that's required to get into the scheme. Now, historically, a few years ago, you could buy a property here and that would qualify, so it made people comfortable because they could buy a property which will ultimately become their main home if they move here, and that was a means to get into the Golden Visa scheme. That was gradually closed down, so they first restricted it to certain areas of the country. So they excluded the sort of main areas of the Algarve and Lisbon, and then they closed it altogether for property investment. And so the main ways of getting into the scheme now is via a private equity fund investment, and you need to put at least €500,000 into that scheme. And some people are concerned about that because the funds haven't been going that long, they're quite new. They're in quite specialist areas and they can be considered quite risky. So you're putting a large lump sum into a potentially high risk investment, and you've got to question whether you actually really want the flexibility that the Golden Visa provides, or would you be happier going the D7 visa route and having the no initial capital outlay required, but being tied to spending a minimum amount of time here in Portugal. So it's a balancing act really, it's a trade-off between the two. In other ways, the two visas are actually the same in the sense that they both provide you with unlimited access to time spent in Portugal. They are both gateways into the new tax schemes if you can qualify for the new IFICI scheme, and I'll put a link to the video I've done on that down below in the description. If you're officially resident here, either via the D7 or Golden Visa route, you qualify for state healthcare and other state benefits, so they're neutral in that respect. And importantly, for a lot of you ultimately wanting to get EU citizenship back again, they both provide pathways to becoming a Portuguese citizen and therefore regaining EU citizenship status. And for that, you need to be here for a minimum of five years. After 5 years, you can then make an application to have your Portuguese passport. They don't require you to give up your British passport or any other passports. You can have dual nationality here in Portugal, but you do have to sit a language test. Now that can be either a test itself, or what I did. My partner and I did the Portuguese government language course, which is an academic year, so starting in September, running to the following July. You go to class twice a week. And in our case, we didn't have to sit a test as such. It was a regular series of smaller assessments throughout the year. And the requirement is to get to an A2 standard according to the EU framework. So now we've covered the basics of the D7 versus Golden Visa and what they both mean. The two clients that I met this week that were both confused about these different types of visas and what it meant for their affairs. The first one was actually still living in the UK, and they had pensions, ISAs and cash investments and stocks and share portfolio. Now they were under the impression that if they moved to Portugal under the D7 visa, that they would have to bring all their money into Portugal, which is not the case. As I said earlier, the D7 visa requires you to demonstrate that you're in receipt of a certain level of passive income. That passive income can come from anywhere. It doesn't necessarily have to arise in Portugal. In this case, they could have left their affairs completely as is. No change is required because they had the pensions, interest and dividends to demonstrate that they were in receipt of the income required above the minimum level. So I just wanted to cover that, because if you are concerned about suddenly having to restructure all your affairs in one go, you don't have to do that. Having said that, it may be advantageous for you to do so. So it might be worth considering how you hold your assets at the moment, what it would mean if you do come to Portugal, and if there's any structuring you can do prior to departing the UK that will put you in a much better position. When we structure assets for clients, so our investments and pension portfolios aren't actually held in Portugal, they're held outside of Portugal in jurisdictions that are tax efficient, recognised by Portugal, but not actually included as a Portuguese territorial asset, which can be quite beneficial for your overall affairs. Now, the second client I met this week that was equally confused about Golden Visa status was actually here already. So they were residents, they've been residents here for 8 years, and they're also non-habitual residents, so they qualify for the NHR status that is now unfortunately closed to new applicants. But they were asking us for our view on the Golden Visa status and whether it's worth them pursuing the Golden Visa. Now, the Golden Visa doesn't confer any tax benefits whatsoever. It's simply a means to get residency here. So if you've got residency status here already, Golden Visa is futile. It doesn't give you any benefits whatsoever. So I think the important thing really is there's a distinction between residency and tax residency. They sit on top of each other. So you first get your legal residency, that's at the base level, and that's either via D7 visa, D2 visa, Golden Visa. If you have any other EU passport, you can get in as an EU resident. They're the base levels. On top of that, then goes the tax position. If you've got an HR status, great. That's going to give you 10 years tax preferential living. It could be standard tax residency, or for newcomers to Portugal, you may be able to bolt on IFICI, so that's the new tax regime. But the important distinction is legal residency comes first via the visa process or EU citizenship, and on top of that sits the tax status. The two don't mix. So in other words, if you've got residency now in Portugal, you don't need to use golden visa, or any visa for that matter. So I hope that clarifies the distinctions and the separation between the tax aspects and legal residency aspects. As I always say in my videos, none of this is advice, it's for information only. But I hope you found that video useful. See you soon.